Before Adam was formed from the dust, had Earth ever been ruled by another civilization? Before the Garden of Eden, shaded by green trees, did another Eden once exist? Radiant, dazzling, and built entirely from glowing precious stone. Could it be that millions of years before we humans appeared, this planet was not silent and primitive at all? Could it be that in reality, a superior pre-Adamite race once existed? A golden age, where extremely advanced civilizations and gigantic prehistoric creatures lived together under a perfect order. If that is true, then what terrifying event tore open the sky and ignited the most brutal cosmic war in history between the angels? And the most chilling secret of all, before Noah's Ark ever set sail, had Earth already been reset by an older and more devastating catastrophe called Lucifer's Great Flood. Everything will be decoded in today's video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any top secret files about the hidden history of humanity. And now dim the lights, find a truly comfortable place to sit and join us as we step into the darkest era of Earth, where the most terrifying secrets about the origin of humanity are waiting to be decoded. Was Adam the first human being on a completely new Earth? Before Adam was formed from the dust, had Earth ever been ruled by another civilization? Genesis opens with an extremely brief sentence. So brief that most of us read past it almost unconsciously. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just one sentence, yet it lays the foundation for the entire universe. Before any kingdom rose, before every language, every city, and before even Adam's first breath, God created the heavens and the earth. This opening sentence does not wander through explanations. It is a firm declaration the Creator is absolute, and the universe is a created thing that receives life from Him. But immediately after that, the second verse sends everything in a very strange direction. The scene is not radiant the way we often imagine it. The earth suddenly appears in a state of being formless and empty. The deep covers everything. Water spreads across the entire scene. And the Spirit of God moves upon the face of the waters. Just picture it. This is an extremely powerful visual image. At this moment, the listener has not yet seen the outline of a green, flourishing Garden of Eden. There is no Adam, no Eve. There is no tree of life, no animals, and no steady sound of human footsteps. The first scene that appears immediately after the declaration of creation is a world submerged in water, chaotic dark, holding its breath as it waits for the Word of God to enter a new order. And right at the thin boundary between these two Bible verses, a massive question appears. If God created a good and perfect heaven and earth, then why in the very second verse is the reader thrown into a scene so desolate, flooded, and filled with the deep? For most of Christianity, the answer is quite simple and direct. Genesis chapter 1 is recounting the sequence of the work of creation. Verse 1 is a general summary. Verse 2 describes the original unformed material before God begins arranging it over 6 days. According to this view, from that chaos light is called forth, the waters are divided. Dry land appears, plants begin to grow, and finally Adam is formed in His image. That is the traditional reading, safe, stable, and grounded across centuries. But in the history of biblical interpretation, there has been a group of theologians who paused for a very long time in the space between verse 1 and verse 2. They stared at the formless and empty condition, looked into that dark deep, and boldly proposed a daring theory. What if verse 2 is not describing a brand new earth waiting to be shaped, but is revealing the ruins of an earth that has just passed through a terrifying judgment? And from that great question mark, the gap theory was officially born. According to this interpretation, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 is the moment when God created the universe in its original perfect state. But chapter 1 verse 2 is the scene of what remained after a destructive catastrophe. In other words, between verse 1 and verse 2 lies a massive gap of time, possibly reaching millions of years. Inside that invisible span, a world before Adam may have risen, reached its peak, then completely collapsed and was wiped away before God began resetting the earth for the age of our humanity. According to this reading, Adam still remains the first human being of the present line of human history. He still stands at the center of the Bible. But the deeper question reaches into the origin itself. Did Adam step onto a completely new earth? Or was he standing on a planet that had once hidden a glorious history? A bloody collapse and a devastating judgment. Scholars who support the gap theory pay special attention to the original Hebrew phrase, tohu vabohu. They argue that this phrase carries the tone of desolation, ruin, and chaos. It sounds exactly like the echo of a world that has just endured an apocalyptic catastrophe. The development of the pre-Adamite civilization. This may be the most fascinating part, but it also requires us to move with the greatest caution. The canonical Bible does not contain any direct line describing an advanced civilization before Adam. This concept belongs entirely to the interpretive layer of the gap theory and its branches of alternative history. Educational research centers, such as the NCSE, have pointed out that the gap theory was in essence an effort by theologians to preserve belief in 6 literal days of creation, while finding a way to place countless geological ages into the dark gap between verse 1 and verse 2 of Genesis. So how do supporters of the gap theory imagine that world? According to this hypothesis, the original Earth was not a dead and silent ball of stone. If you could rewind time into that gap of millions of years, you might witness a world operating within a radiant and overwhelming order. Imagine an age where majestic mountains, vast seas, and great ancient forests were ruled by gigantic creatures, the prehistoric dinosaurs. Above that, there may have been intelligent races, often called by mystery researchers pre-Adamic men. They built extremely advanced civilizations, and everything on Earth at that time was under the rule of a supreme angel, the most radiant and powerful being in the universe. This is precisely why the gap theory has such enduring power. It offers a seemingly perfect explanation for the mysteries held by modern science. The enormous fossil layers buried deep underground, the geological ages stretching across millions of years. From this perspective, do not contradict the Bible, because all of them, from prehistoric creatures to the pre-Adamite civilization, belong to that ancient world, a world that was completely destroyed in the terrifying catastrophe known as Lucifer's flood. Even strongly critical conservative organizations, such as Answers in Genesis and Creation Ministries, acknowledge that belief in a pre-Adamite humanity wiped out by Lucifer's flood, making way for the restoration work of 6 days, is the core backbone of the gap theory. Evidence from other biblical chapters. However, once the door of the gap theory has opened slightly, other pieces from the Bible begin to pull toward one another in a strange way. Ezekiel chapter 28 suddenly speaks of a figure who once lived in the Garden of Eden, who was clothed with all kinds of precious stones, who was an anointed guardian cherub, and then fell because of pride. Isaiah chapter 14 mentions an arrogant being who wanted to raise his throne above the stars and overthrow the Most High. And Revelation chapter 12 describes a terrifying war in heaven between the archangel Michael and the ancient dragon. When these fierce details are placed beside the shadowy gap between Genesis verse 1 and verse 2, a great and bloody epic picture begins to appear. Before Adam, there may have been a rebellion. Before the human Garden of Eden, there may have existed an Eden of precious stones. And before Noah's Ark ever set sail, Earth may once have been submerged by a wrath far older than anything we remember. Between the first 2 verses of Genesis, there may be only one breath of creation. But it may also be the black velvet curtain closing over a radiant age that has been forgotten. And if a world truly existed before Adam, then a series of chilling questions rushes toward us. Who governed that great kingdom? Why did it collapse into ashes? And what was Lucifer plotting in the shadows before the first human being opened his eyes in the Garden of Eden? The Garden of Eden, made of precious stones, Lucifer before his fall. To answer the question, before Adam who ruled the earth, we must temporarily close the book of Genesis. Let us turn to one of the strangest and most shocking passages in the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 28. On the surface, this passage is a rebuke against the king of Tyre, an ancient port city overflowing with wealth. Tyre was once a golden center of trade, famous for merchant fleets loaded with goods and enormous treasuries filled with silver and gold. That extreme wealth caused this mortal king to imagine himself as a god. However, when we read each word carefully, the language of the prophet Ezekiel begins to move far beyond the limits of a flesh and blood human being. He is no longer merely describing a local king. He is opening a top-secret file about a cosmic being before his fall, Lucifer. Listen carefully to this passage. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering sapphire, diamond, ruby, emerald, and gold. I appointed you as an anointed guardian cherub to cover. You were on the holy mountain of God, and you walked among the fiery stones. Wait a moment. A king of Tyre may have been wealthy, but where would he get the authority to be a guardian cherub? Where would he get the right to walk on the holy mountain among fiery stone? This very inconsistency has led theologians for centuries to recognize a startling truth. This passage has two layers of meaning. The outer layer is a judgment against an arrogant king, but the inner core is a top-secret record of Lucifer's appearance and identity before he fell. And this is where everything becomes wild for the gap theory. As we already know, Adam's Garden of Eden in Genesis appears with a distinctly earthly and ecological tone. It is a flourishing ecosystem, nourished by the sound of water flowing from 4 great rivers and carrying the scent of soil from which the first human being was formed. This space is filled with the green life of the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the movement of animals. Here, Adam plays the role of a gardener, a gentle steward entrusted with the mission of tending, cultivating, and naming all living things. It is a simple, warm land fully connected to the rhythm of nature. More than that, Adam lives there peacefully with his wife without having to worry about food or clothing. His work is also gentle watching over tending and watering the trees in the garden. That is truly the dream life of many people, isn't it? But in terms of value and splendor, Lucifer's Eden in the book of Ezekiel carries a level of luxury far beyond it. This space removes almost entirely the elements of soil or ordinary biological vegetation. It is a mineral garden created from the purest, rarest, and most commercially precious materials in the universe. The Bible lists Lucifer's original assets as 9 supreme precious stones: ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle. More strikingly, all of these extraordinary gemstones were not used merely to decorate the ground. They were skillfully set directly into pure gold to become Lucifer's covering from the very moment he was created. The important point lies in the broader setting of the passage. This figure is placed on the holy mountain of God and once walked among the fiery stones. This is powerful language. It has led many interpreters within the Christian tradition to see a layer of meaning that reaches beyond the king of Tyre and points toward Lucifer, before his fall a high and radiant created being, holding an office within the angelic order, who was later cast down because of pride. If Adam's Eden is the place where humanity learns to live in obedience, then the Eden in Ezekiel, according to this reading, resembles a sacred space of authority and glory. One is connected to earth trees, water, and the responsibility to care for creation. The other is connected to precious stones, fire, the holy mountain, and the office of a cherub. This very difference leads supporters of the gap theory to ask a major question. Are these two Bible passages speaking about the same garden, or are they revealing two different moments in the history of creation? According to their reading, the Eden of precious stones in Ezekiel may belong to an older order before Adam was created. It was the place where Lucifer had once been given beauty, wisdom, and a high office. Meanwhile, Adam's Garden of Eden in Genesis is the beginning of a new age, where God placed humanity into a world that had been arranged again, giving Adam the task of governing, obeying, and preserving life. Of course, this remains an inference from the gap theory, not a direct statement of Scripture. But it helps explain why Ezekiel chapter 28 has always made many readers pause. Because this passage does not only speak about the wealth of a king of Tyre, it also reveals a shocking truth before Adam was placed into the green garden of trees. Another scene may have existed within the memory of the Bible, an Eden of precious stones, fire, and the holy mountain where an anointed cherub stood in the beauty given by God. And it was there that the first tragedy of pride began to take root. Lucifer, before he became Satan, the one who carried the ambition to seize the throne. When people hear the name Satan, many immediately think of a cunning serpent crawling around the tree in the Garden of Eden, whispering poisonous words into Eve's ear. But when we also study the truths found in the book of Ezekiel chapter 28, the story of that cunning evil one becomes even more gripping. Before he carried the name Satan, meaning the adversary, and before he took the form of a vile serpent, Lucifer was one of the highest and most beautiful created beings in the entire order of the universe. Ezekiel preserved a majestic record, revealing Lucifer's supreme authority through unique titles full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, and an anointed cherub who covers. Understand the weight of that title clearly. Lucifer was not an angel standing in the outer circle. He was a cherub, one of the highest ranks of angels, bearing the seal of royalty. He was the anointed one granted the special privilege of spreading his majestic wings close to the throne of the Most High. Lucifer's fall is so devastating and haunting because he had no flaw at the starting point. Evil did not come from mud or from darkness. It was born in one of the most radiant places in the universe. The tragedy of Lucifer was not innate evil, but the most subtle, chilling, and insane deviation in the history of creation. Everything Lucifer possessed a dazzling beauty beyond comparison, a superior wisdom that understood countless things and ruling authority over multitudes of angels was originally a gift, a privilege given by the Creator, so that he could serve the universe. But everything began to break apart at the exact moment Lucifer looked at the powers he possessed. Instead of being grateful to the Creator, he gave birth to greed, and he dared to envy even God. His perfect beauty caused him not only to gaze at himself in fascination, but to begin feeling resentment. Why should a being with a form as perfect and dazzling as mine have to stand beneath the shadow of someone else? His superior wisdom made the existing order feel offensive to him. In his pride, he believed he was more than capable of designing a better cosmic order. Obedience gradually turned into jealousy over power. Why should I humbly obey when I am fully capable of ruling on my own? And his position beside the throne injected into his blood the most deadly poison of all. Day after day, hour after hour, as he witnessed countless beings across the universe bowing in worship before the Creator, the envy within Lucifer burned fiercely. He grew tired of being only a mirror reflecting glory for another. He craved that worship. He wanted to seize that radiance for himself. And so, your heart became proud because of your beauty, and your wisdom was corrupted because of your splendor. You see, the truth can sometimes be very cruel. There was no dark force tempting or manipulating Lucifer. Evil was born from the envy inside the brightest angel, and our lives today are very much the same. Many people are born with a very kind and gentle nature. But when they step into life and see the people around them becoming more successful, wealthier, or sitting in higher positions, the seed of envy naturally begins to grow. They begin to compare. They begin to feel irritated. They feel that life is unfair because they have also tried hard, worked diligently, yet still cannot succeed like others. And then that envy, that jealousy gradually clouds their reason. It slowly eats away at character, turning someone once decent into someone petty and malicious. They become willing to use any method to step on others, just to steal a position or a glory that was never truly theirs. That is why the fall does not always come from terrifying temptations outside us. Sometimes the devil is awakened by the envy buried deep inside each of us, and returning to Lucifer. At the very moment he fixed his eyes on the throne of God and secretly thought, that place should belong to me, the bloodiest rebellion in the history of the universe officially began. But to truly hear the dark calculations roaring inside Lucifer's mind, at that time, we must turn to another passage, the book of Isaiah, chapter 14. If Ezekiel sketches Lucifer's radiant, glittering outer appearance, then Isaiah uses a sharp blade to cut open that outer shell and expose the naked tumor of ambition swelling inside, borrowing the image of a taunt against the fall of the king of Babylon. The Bible allows us to overhear 5 thoughts of extreme pride that Lucifer whispered within himself. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the highest clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. What is the most frightening thing about this rebellion? It did not begin with the sound of swords, fire, and smoke. It began in the chilling silence of the inner heart. In today's real-world language, Lucifer was not content to remain an excellent employee or a powerful chief executive officer. He wanted to remove the founder. He wanted to take the chairman's seat, a seat that belonged to the Creator alone. At this point, do you notice something extremely familiar? Fast forward millions of years later, when he took the form of the serpent crawling in the Garden of Eden. What was the temptation? Satan whispered into Eve's ear. Eat it, and you will be like God. It turns out that this was not merely a lie used to deceive a mortal. It was the echo of his own deepest desire, the bitter longing that once burned through his own being. He took the very poison that had destroyed him long ago and used it to poison humanity. When we put the 2 pieces from Ezekiel and Isaiah together, we get a complete and tragic portrait of Lucifer. He is proof that a fall is not merely a sudden impulse or a single mistaken step. A fall begins when a being quietly removes reverence for the one who created him and turns towards self-adoration, worshiping himself. And if the gap theory is correct, then this story carries terrifying weight. It proves that long before humanity ever knew the word sin, the universe had already witnessed a coup at the highest level. But Lucifer's arrogant ambition could not remain hidden in thought forever. The declaration of war, I will be like the Most High, officially ignited one of the most devastating events in history. Not only in heaven, but the entire original earth, under his rule, was about to be swept into a storm of judgment. That was when the cosmic war broke out, placing a bloody final mark on the entire pre-Adamite civilization. The cosmic war and Lucifer's great flood. After Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, Lucifer's portrait has moved from original beauty to the ambition to seize the throne. He is imagined as a high-ranking cherub, once standing within a holy order, once given beauty wisdom and an office close to God. But as pride grew within him, that ambition moved beyond the realm of a private thought. It became an organized rebellion. Lucifer wanted to raise his throne above the stars of God. He wanted to sit in the highest position. He wanted to become like the Most High. Such an ambition needed more than personal self-exaltation. It needed factions, persuasion, and others willing to step into rebellion with him. And Revelation chapter 12 opens a terrifying scene. John sees a great red dragon. Its tail sweeps away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and throws them down to the earth. In Christian tradition, that dragon is understood as Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. The image of 1/3 of the stars is understood as angels. Through his power and wisdom, Lucifer successfully persuaded 1/3 of the angels to stand on his side. They accepted his leadership in order to overthrow the old order, hoping to rule the universe with him. This is a common reading in Christian theology, though the exact timing of the heavenly war is interpreted differently across traditions. And the cosmic war officially broke out. This was the most earth-shaking event ever recorded in the history of the spiritual world. Revelation chapter 12 reveals the setting of this war. On one side stood Lucifer, once the most radiant angel in the universe, now leading 1/3 of the angelic host corrupted by pride. On the opposite side, the archangel Michael, the supreme commander of the faithful host, stepped forward to defend the absolute order of the Creator. The primordial heavens seemed to be torn apart by the power of billions of spiritual beings striking one another. Every order, every law of the universe at that time was shaken violently by the scale of the war. Lucifer's army fought with the madness of ambition to seize the throne, while Michael's army fought with the strength of absolute authority. But no matter how wise and powerful Lucifer was, he had made one core irreparable mistake. He was using power that had been given to him to fight against the very source of that power. He could not win. Before the supreme authority carried by the archangel Michael, Lucifer's forces quickly broke apart. The artificial light of his pride was swallowed by the eternal light of the Creator. In the end, Lucifer suffered a crushing defeat. There was no negotiation and no compromise. A sentence of eternal expulsion was immediately carried out. Lucifer was stripped of his radiant jeweled covering, stripped of every privileged title and governing position on the holy mountain. From his position beside the throne of the universe, Lucifer and his entire rebellious army were driven out of the heavens and thrown down to the earth. That fall forever ended the golden age of the one once called Son of the Dawn. And at the same time, it dragged the entire original earth into an irreversible catastrophe. But Lucifer's collapse did not stop with him personally. From the perspective of the gap theory, Earth at that time was the region directly governed by Lucifer. When the ruling figure bearing sin was thrown down, his entire kingdom was also pulled into judgment. God decided to completely destroy that world in order to erase the remnants of rebellion. This event is called by some researchers Lucifer's Great Flood. We are familiar with the flood of Noah. But Noah's flood still carried mercy. Noah was allowed to build an ark, and the living creatures were preserved according to their kinds. With Lucifer's catastrophe, however, it was total destruction. There was no compromise. No ark was built, and no seed of life was preserved. Judgment came down and submerged the entire pre-Adamite civilization, along with prehistoric creatures beneath the sea. Light was withdrawn. Earth's temperature dropped sharply, and a dark, freezing ice age covered the globe. This is also how the gap theory explains the sudden extinction of the dinosaurs and the many fossils buried beneath ancient geological layers. From a radiant planet filled with life, Earth became a desolate and dead world. This destruction brings us back to decode the exact condition of Earth in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. According to this hypothesis, that Bible verse is not describing original matter waiting to be shaped. It is directly recording the ruined condition of the planet after a cosmic catastrophe. At this point, Adam had not yet appeared. Modern humanity still did not exist. Earth was only a planet submerged beneath a black ocean, burying every remnant of an age that had ended. It existed in that silent and dark condition for a very long time, until a word rang out, "Let there be light." And that was the moment God began the 6-day process of recreating the earth, establishing a new ecosystem to prepare for the appearance of the age of humanity, the age of Adam. If you believe in the gap theory, you will recognize this as a firm declaration. The judgment has been closed, and the work of restoration has officially begun. Light appears, driving away the chaos. The waters are divided. Dry land rises once again from the sea. Trees begin to sprout, and the stars are positioned again in the heavens to measure time. Animals, birds of the sky, and fish of the sea gradually fill the empty spaces. And finally, at the peak of that work of restoration, Adam is formed in the very image of the Creator. If this theory is true, Adam stepped into a world carrying a terrifying memory he knew nothing about. The Garden of Eden was a completely new beginning for humanity. But beneath those green layers of earth lay the ruins of an ancient rebellion. This very context makes the event in the Garden of Eden heavier and more haunting than ever. When the serpent crawls toward Eve in Genesis chapter 3, it does not come as a mindless creature. The one within that serpent carries the entire history of pride, fall, and rebellion. The sweet temptation, "Eat it, and you will be like God," is actually the echo of the same throne-seizing ambition that had burned Lucifer himself millions of years earlier. He uses the exact same old script plants, the exact same deadly poison, and pulls humanity into the same tragic path. At this point, the moral lesson of the whole story appears with extreme clarity. Even though the gap theory, the pre-Adamite civilization, and Lucifer's flood will always remain controversial theological hypotheses, the core message they leave behind is still chillingly sharp. Every tragedy of collapse in the universe begins at the moment a created being wants to exalt itself beyond the boundaries set by the Creator. Lucifer was given supreme glory, then gave birth to the desire to seize the throne. Adam and Eve were given the entire garden, then were tempted to become like God. Later, humanity was given life, then gathered together to build the Tower of Babel, simply to make a name for ourselves. Across every age, the same old disease keeps returning in different forms. The created being receives a gift, then becomes proud and forgets the one who gave that gift. But if Lucifer's flood was absolute punishment, then the 6 days of creation in Genesis are a great testimony to the restoring power of God. He brings order back to the place that had once been chaotic. He plants life in the soil of death. He prepared a fresh new world for Adam, even though the past of this planet may once have been a devastated and defiled battlefield. From the moment the words, "Let there be light," rang out, the universe turned into an entirely new age. The age of Adam, the age of humanity. Yet, perhaps the story still does not end there. What if I told you that Lucifer's flood may not have been the only terrifying event? Suppose the purge that erased the pre-Adamite world was not Earth's first reset. If we turn back the deepest geological layers and the fragments preserved in mysterious ancient texts, an even more insane and chilling vision begins to appear, even before Lucifer fell. Earth may have already been the graveyard of countless other great civilizations. A brutal cycle of birth development, rising to the peak, then pride. And finally, complete erasure through extinction-level catastrophes more ancient than anything we call ancient. And if the history of Earth is truly a chain of overlapping resets like this, then Adam, or even we ourselves today, are ultimately living in which civilization? The 7 civilizations. Hypothesis: where are we in the cycle? If the history of Earth is truly a chain of overlapping resets, then which civilization are we in the end? For centuries, we have been taught a familiar lesson. Human history is a straight line moving upward. According to the evolutionary model laid down by Darwin, modern humans, Homo sapiens, separated from ape-like ancestors, spent millions of years evolving and only truly took shape around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. We draw for ourselves a very logical path. Our ancestors began by living in caves, hunting and gathering, and only later learned agriculture and animal husbandry. After that came industrial society, and then the high-tech age we live in today. According to this view, each new generation is smarter, more advanced, and possesses greater knowledge than the one before it. We proudly assume that we are the only peak of Earth. However, that confidence is being shaken violently. When this straight line of history is placed beside archaeological data, geological evidence, and newly uncovered ancient texts, countless holes begin to appear. First, in recent decades, archaeologists have repeatedly had to rewrite the textbooks concerning the timeline of what we call civilization. The strongest blow must be the megalithic complex of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. With a date of more than 11,000 years old, this site proves a truth that runs against common assumptions. People at that time already knew how to calculate, carve, and build gigantic stone temples filled with powerful symbolism, long before they knew agriculture. It completely shatters the prejudice that says people had to learn farming and eat well before they could build temples and create religion. In the same way, countless sites across the world are revealing signs of complex social organization, sharp astronomical knowledge, and sophisticated construction techniques, appearing far earlier than the primitive to modern model we usually assume. And that is not all. The history of science has also preserved discoveries that have troubled scholars for decades. For example, the controversial fossil traces found in the 20th century. A print resembling a human shoe heel pressed onto the fossil of a trilobite, a sea creature that went extinct 250 million years ago. Or another case with absolute scientific authenticity, the Oklo nuclear reactor in Gabon, Africa, discovered in the year 1972. Analyses show that around 1.7 billion years ago, nuclear fission reactions operated smoothly there for hundreds of thousands of years. Of course, science affirms that this was not a reactor built by extraterrestrials or by some intelligence. It was a 100% natural phenomenon, occurring when physical conditions, groundwater channels, and uranium ore happened to converge perfectly. But this discovery carries an extremely unsettling meaning. It proves that highly complex mechanisms, the kind modern humanity needs, advanced technology to reproduce, once existed and operated smoothly in the deepest layers of Earth's history, far beyond every timeline humanity has drawn for itself. When all these pieces are placed side by side, from archaeology and geology to seemingly impossible artifacts, a massive question appeared. Has human history truly been fully recorded in what we are digging up today? Or were most of the glorious civilizations of the past completely erased by ice ages, great floods, continental drift, and the wrath of nature? And right at this blind spot, the seven civilizations hypothesis appears. This hypothesis argues that human history is not a straight line moving upward, but a repeating cycle. In each cycle, humanity appears, builds, society develops knowledge to a peak, reaches unbelievable technological limits, and then enters a period of collapse, when Earth undergoes a reset event to restructure the entire order. Each time it happens, one civilization is erased, and the survivors left behind begin building a new civilization from below zero, carrying broken memories of a golden age and turning them into mythology. Evidence from ancient texts reinforces the chilling force of this hypothesis. In the early 1900s, archaeologists found a clay prism at Nippur, in what is now Iraq. The text on it is the Sumerian king list. The most shocking part is that this list clearly records that before the Great Flood, the first 8 kings ruled the earth for a total of 241,200 years. Some kings ruled for 36,000 to 43,200 years. But after the flood swept through, kingship was lowered again from heaven, and the lifespans and reigns of later kings began to shrink dramatically, narrowing gradually until they matched the lifespans of ordinary human beings today. Another piece comes from Greece. In the writings of the great philosopher Plato, there is a passage about a meeting between the lawgiver Solon and a high-ranking Egyptian priest. The old priest looked at Solon and spoke with pity. "You Greeks are truly only children. You remember only the most recent flood. But before that, this world had already been destroyed countless times. The greatest destruction was by fire, not by water." That statement was not an empty saying. It outlines the sequence of the two most recent destructions humanity may have faced, events for which geological science has begun to find confirming evidence. Researchers of this hypothesis believe that present-day humanity is living in the seventh civilization. That means before us, 6 civilizations may have risen to their peak and then been crushed. So how did the two most recent resets unfold? The reset by fire. The sky burned bright around 12,800 years ago. Nearly 13,000 years ago, Earth suddenly received a fatal blow. Science calls this the Younger Dryas event. Many studies have suggested that this was the result of a massive comet breaking apart and plunging into Earth's atmosphere. The evidence lies clearly in the death boundary layer, a geological sediment layer found across multiple continents. In that black layer of Earth, researchers have found melted glass nanodiamonds, iridium, and thick soot. Undeniable traces of extremely high-temperature explosions and wildfires spreading on a global scale. The consequences unfolded almost immediately. A rain of fire poured down from the sky. It is estimated that around 10% of all biomass on Earth was burned to ash in the blink of an eye. Black smoke and fine dust rolled upward, completely blocking the sunlight. The atmosphere was choked, forcing the planet suddenly back into a dark and freezing ice age. The civilization that existed at that time, whether we call them Atlantis, the Clovis culture, or the first architects of the temples at Göbekli Tepe, ended in a sea of fire. They did not drown. They were burned alive, and the world sank into a deadly hibernation. The reset by water. The world sank beneath the sea. After struggling to survive the ice age caused by the rain of fire, the survivors began crawling out of caves to rebuild the world. This time they chose to settle in coastal and river regions where the land was fertile and food was easier to find. But then the temperature of the planet suddenly warmed. The enormous ice sheets at the poles began to melt. Sea levels rose at a terrifying speed. Geological data shows that in some regions, sea levels rose by 16 to 25 meters within only a few centuries. The ocean slowly advanced inland, quietly swallowing the largest and most fertile continental shelves in the world. The Persian Gulf region, Doggerland in Europe, and Sundaland, the landmass once connecting many parts of present-day Southeast Asia, sank forever beneath the ocean. Places that had once been densely populated centers, bustling cities, and coastal cultures gradually became the seafloor. This catastrophe of the rising ocean haunted the minds of the survivors and became the original template for great flood traditions spread across cultures around the world, from the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible to the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, the terrifying great floods that submerged the world before the pre-Adamite age. Records from Greek mythology. It is not only the Bible with the story of Noah or the Mesopotamian epic with the hero Gilgamesh. If we open the pages of ancient European civilization, the memory of a global reset by water is also deeply carved into Greek mythology. According to historical scholars, this story began to be recorded and widely passed down by the Greeks during the Bronze Age, around 1600 to 1200 before Christ. But the details inside it are in reality the echoes of a devastating geological catastrophe that took place during the melting of the Ice Age around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This legend describes a dark chapter in human history. Zeus, Lord of the sky and ruler of the earth, looked down upon the human world. But what he saw was only a society rotting from within. He saw human beings becoming increasingly cruel, immoral, wicked in heart, and using strength to oppress the weak. They gradually forgot righteousness, lost their sense of proper conduct, and abandoned reverence for the gods. This corruption enraged Zeus, and he issued a cold judgment. Human beings are the source of calamity in the world. If they are shown mercy and allowed to enjoy life, they will multiply quickly and become arrogant and prideful. If they are punished and made to taste a little suffering, of course, they will restrain themselves. But after a moment, they will fall again and commit every kind of evil. Therefore, it is better to wipe them all out at once. After that, Zeus summoned the gods to an emergency council on the summit of Olympus. The final verdict was given: there would be no negotiation. A great rain would be sent to create a great flood, drowning and purifying the whole of humanity. But in the darkness of destruction, there was still a ray of hope. The Titan Prometheus, the one who had once endured a bone-piercing punishment for daring to steal the fire of the gods and give it to humanity, had a son named Deucalion. At that time, Deucalion was living among human beings on Earth. Unlike the crowd sinking into sin, Deucalion was a virtuous man who always advised people to turn toward goodness in order to avoid divine punishment. But no one was willing to listen. One day, Deucalion went to the summit of Olympus to visit his father. Through his power of foresight, Prometheus saw through the coming disaster and urgently warned him, Zeus is about to use a great flood to destroy humanity. You must quickly find a way to escape. After receiving this life and death warning, Deucalion came down from the mountain and immediately built a strong boat with his wife Thera, exactly like Noah, building the ark. Then they loaded necessities and seeds onto the boat in order to take refuge. Sure enough, several days later, the sky darkened. From the heavens came a tremendous downpour. This rain of wrath did not stop after 1 or 2 days. It continued for several months. The floodwaters rose at a terrifying speed, submerging a vast stretch of land, swallowing every prosperous city-state, until even the highest and most majestic mountains were drowned beneath the waters. The history of that civilization was officially erased. Only after several months did the rain finally stop. Deucalion's rescue boat drifted silently over the black waters and finally ran aground on the summit of Mount Parnassus, one of the few rare rocky peaks still rising above the surface. Not long afterward, the floodwaters gradually receded and the earth appeared again. But the scene that remained was only a desolate, empty, distant, and mist-covered land. On every side were corpses and mud. There was not a single human figure left, standing before the spine-chilling silence of a planet that had just been reset. Deucalion and his wife could only bow down and pray for the gods to show them how to restore the world. A sacred voice belonging to the prophetic goddess Themis rang out with a mysterious riddle. Cover your heads, loosen your garments, go up the hillside, and as you walk, pick up the bones of your mother and throw them behind your backs. In a moment of extreme confusion, Deucalion understood the hidden meaning of the divine message. They realized that Mother here was not their biological mother. Mother was Mother Earth Gaia, the source of all life. And the bones of Mother Earth were stones. Thinking this, they covered their faces with veils, bent down, picked up stones on the hillside, and threw them behind their backs. Sure enough, a miracle appeared. The stones Deucalion threw down immediately became men, while the stones thrown by Deucalion's wife became women. From the desolation of mud and cold stone, humanity once again appeared upon the earth. A new age began again. From the Mediterranean world of Greek mythology, let us turn the compass back toward the mysterious East. If you think the wrath of Zeus was already severe enough, then the ancient Chinese records of the world's reset disaster carry an even more earth-shaking scale: the Great Flood in Chinese legend. But before we speak about the catastrophe of extinction, we must return to the beginning. How did human beings in the East appear after the primordial ruins? The ancient book Taiping Yulan recorded an East Asian creation process filled with the color of Nuwa. According to tradition, in the age when heaven and earth had just opened, when the ground was still a wilderness without human beings, Nuwa began the work of creating life. In the proper sequence, on the first day of the first lunar month, she created chickens. On the second day, she created dogs. On the third day, she formed goats. On the fourth day, she made pigs. And on the sixth day, she created horses. Then, on the seventh day, the final masterpiece appeared. Nuwa took yellow clay, mixed it with water, and shaped the first small human beings according to her own form. However, shaping each person by hand was too slow. To speed up the process, she pulled out a vine, dipped it deep into the mud, and swung it forcefully through the air. Each drop of mud that flew out and fell to the ground became countless living people. The legend says that those carefully shaped from yellow clay later became nobles and people of high status, while those born from the mud splashed from the vine had to bear a lower and poorer fate. To keep humanity from being wiped out and to allow the race to sustain itself, Nuwa personally established the rites of marriage. A peaceful age seemed to have begun, but that peace was extremely short-lived. Earth soon had to face the first reset in Chinese mythology. This catastrophe did not come from a rainstorm, but from a war that shook heaven and earth. It was the fierce great battle between Gonggong, the water god, and Zhurong, the fire god. Defeated and driven mad by humiliation, Gonggong rammed his head straight into Mount Buzhou. Tragically, Buzhou was not merely an ordinary mountain. It was the greatest pillar supporting heaven. When the pillar broke, half the sky immediately collapsed. The layer of space was torn open into a gigantic hole. The earth shook and split into deep chasms. Not only did rain fall from above, but black floodwaters from the lower realms also erupted violently upward. Wave after wave swallowed the land, turning the earth into a vast and deadly ocean. Humanity faced the scene of total extinction. Standing before the sight of the children she had created, screaming in the floodwaters, Nuwa immediately intervened. She refined 5 colored stones to patch the hole in the sky, cut off the 4 limbs of a giant divine turtle to make 4 pillars supporting the 4 directions of heaven and earth. She personally destroyed the black dragon to rescue Jizhou, then gathered reeds and burned them into enormous piles of ash to stop the raging waters. When the blue sky had been repaired, the 4 directions returned to peace, and only then did the floodwaters recede. Although this legend does not directly say how corrupted humanity had become at that time, the message it leaves behind is very clear. In that great calamity of collapsing heaven and splitting earth, only those with a kind nature who lived carefully and knew reverence for heaven and earth were preserved by the gods to enter a new page of history. But the cycle did not stop there. The second great flood continued to descend upon China, and this time historians can connect it with a clearer point in time, the age of Emperor Yao, more than 4,000 years ago. According to the record in the Book of Documents, the canon of Yao, this was a long-lasting great flood with terrifying destructive power. The flood waters surged across the land. The roaring waters surrounded and covered the mountains. Their force rose up to the heavens. The scene at that time was so terrifying that Mencius in Tengwen Gong described it this way. In the time of Emperor Yao, the waters flowed backward and flooded all of China. Dragons and serpents crawled everywhere, and the people lost all their homes and had no place to settle. At first, Emperor Yao sent an official named Gun to control the waters. Gun used the thinking of an ordinary human being. Wherever the water rose, he built dikes to block it. The result was that the more dikes were built, the higher the flood waters rose, breaking through the banks and sweeping away tens of thousands of lives. For 9 long years, Gun was completely powerless. For 9 years, the work was not accomplished. It was not until the age of the heavenly emperor Yu Shun that Gun's son, Yu the Great, was appointed to replace his father and carry this responsibility. Legend says that Yu's reverent sincerity moved the river god, and he was given by the god a secret map for controlling the waters. Holding that map in his hands, Yu the Great immediately changed the entire strategy. He no longer used earth and stones to block the waters, but ordered canals and channels to be dug in order to guide them, leading the floodwaters straight out to the Great Sea. Yu the Great's journey lasted more than 13 exhausting years. Combined with the previous 9 years of Gun, the people of that time had to struggle through the flooding disaster for more than 22 long years. Finally, the floodwaters began to lower, saving tens of thousands of common people from drowning. But the true reason the flood passed was not only Yu the Great's canal digging technique. In ancient Chinese history, the ruler was always the spiritual model for an entire dynasty. Every word, action, and moral quality of the person at the top would determine the fate and blessings of all the people. Yu the Great was not only an outstanding hydraulic engineer, he was also one of the most virtuous kings in history. Through his own devotion and character, he moved the people, causing the morality of the whole society to gradually return to simplicity, kindness, and reverence for the divine. And it was this moral elevation that became the final key that calmed the wrath of heaven and earth, allowing human beings to continue surviving and flourishing until today. And the cycle of destruction seems to spare no continent. Leaving the ruins of ancient China, we continue turning the compass toward the mysterious lands of South Asia. Here, the story of the world's reset by water appears again in another form, deeply colored by the philosophies of Buddhism and Hinduism. The Great Flood Legend of India, the prophecy of the divine. In the epic Treasure House of India, the catastrophe of extinction begins with an extremely strange encounter. The story tells of an ascetic sage named Manu. He was a man of noble virtue, practicing day and night, keeping discipline and carrying compassion for all living things in his heart. One day, while Manu was cleansing his body and quieting his mind in the sacred Ganges River, he accidentally saw a small fish gasping for life. Out of compassion, the ascetic lifted the fish from the water and saved it. But Manu never expected that the tiny creature lying in the palm of his hand was not an ordinary fish. Suddenly, the fish began to speak in human language. It delivered a chilling prophecy. Prepare yourself, Manu. This summer, the waters will burst open. A great flood will rise, submerge all things, and destroy every living being in this world. The fish instructed him to immediately build a strong boat to save himself before the end of the world arrived. Manu did not treat it as the joke of a hallucination. With reverence for heaven and earth, he quietly cut wood, built a large boat, and waited patiently. And then in the summer of that year, the prophecy came true. The sky collapsed. Enormous rains poured down without stopping. The waters of the Ganges rose violently, swallowing every temple and village, turning the entire Indian subcontinent into a black sea. Every living creature that could not react in time was stripped of life by the raging waters. Right when Manu's boat was tossing among waves as tall as mountains, a miracle appeared. The small fish he had saved long ago returned, but now it carried divine power. Many scholars believe this was an incarnation of the god Vishnu. The fish swam forward, took the rope in its mouth, and used extraordinary strength to pull Manu's boat through the wrath of the ocean, bringing him safely to a high mountain peak that had not been submerged. When the great flood receded, the world was once again empty and desolate. Manu became the only surviving seed of life. From that solitary ascetic, his descendants began to multiply, rebuild a new civilization, and become the ancestors of the people of India today. The terrifying memory of the Great Flood, along with the compassion that helped human beings escape the death sentence of nature, was recorded and passed down to later generations by Manu himself in the famous ancient text, the Laws of Manu, also known as the Manusmriti. You see, there was no internet, no cultural exchange, and vast oceans separated them by tens of thousands of miles. And yet, from the Bible of the Middle East, to Greek mythology, to the historical records of China, to the epics of India, all of them recorded the same pattern: the fall of humanity, a global flood, and a small righteous group chosen to survive. And this frightening similarity does not stop in Asia or Europe. Let us continue turning the compass across the oceans. Fragments from every continent. The memory of the end of the world. In the clay tablets belonging to the Babylonian epic, the wrath belongs to the god Bel. Dissatisfied with the extreme corruption of humanity, Bel decided to sweep everything away with a great flood. But in the darkness of extinction, the god Ea secretly instructed an old man, living by the mouth of a river, to quickly build a large boat and bring the most essential things with him. When the sky broke open, rain poured down for 7 days and 7 nights. The world was drowned in water, with only the highest mountain peaks faintly rising above the surface. But the strongest evidence must be found in the Americas. The famous British ethnologist James Fraser, after many years of research, announced a shocking truth among more than 130 indigenous tribes stretching from North America through Central America all the way down to South America. There was almost no tribe that did not pass down stories of the Great Flood. The ancient Mexican text, the Book of the Painted Words of Chimalpopoca, records a terrifying end-time scene. The sky nearly collapsed, touching the earth itself. Within exactly 1 day, all of humanity was destroyed, and even the greatest mountains were swallowed by the waters. Meanwhile, the sacred Bible of the Maya describes it in a haunting way. It was a destructive calamity. A gigantic rain poured down from the sky, and human beings sank into despair. Even among tribes living in isolation on the remote Polynesian islands of Oceania, the memory of seawater suddenly rising and drowning the world is still sung in their traditional rituals. The truth behind the word mythology. When we place all these fragments on the table, we are forced to face an undeniable truth. Ancient humanity truly went through a great purge by water. Sadly, modern people today, whenever they hear the words mythology or legend, immediately sneer and label it superstition. We deceive ourselves into thinking that modern science stands at the highest peak, looking down on the past with superior eyes. But there is an extremely ironic truth that history often ignores. While the modern crowd rushes to mock mythology, the greatest minds of science were often the ones who feared and trusted it the most. Sir Isaac Newton, praised as the father of modern physics, actually spent more than half his life and wrote millions of words trying to decode the Bible prophecies and ancient writings. He never treated mythology as fairy tales. With his extraordinary mind, Newton believed ancient texts were historical data and cosmic laws encoded. Or take Werner Heisenberg, one of the fathers of quantum physics, who left behind a famous saying: "The first gulp from the cup of science will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting for you." The greatest geniuses of humanity understood one thing. Physical science and ancient mythology are in reality two different languages describing the same reality. Now let us use logical thinking and statistical probability to revisit the question of the flood. Return to the primitive stage of this cycle of civilization. Human society was extremely backward. There was no internet, no aircraft, and no ocean-going ships. Communication between two tribes separated by a mountain range was already impossible, let alone communication across continents. So mathematically speaking, what is the probability that more than 130 completely separate cultures around the world, from South America, Greece, Mesopotamia, India, to China, would naturally imagine the same extinction scenario? All of them share one formula: the corruption of morality, the wrath of the divine, a global flood, and a small group of people warned in advance to build a boat for survival. The probability that this is pure coincidence is zero. When hundreds of witnesses who never knew each other, living in different ages and on different continents, all give the same testimony before the court of history, it is no longer random inspiration or rich imagination. It is historical reality. The fortunate ancestors who survived in their shock and deepest pain after seeing humanity erased carved that unforgettable scene into memory. They were not writing fairy tales to lull us to sleep. They were creating a black box for humanity. They used the simplest languages, drawings, and symbols to seal that catastrophe, driven by one desperate cry: future generations, at all costs, must never forget this bloody lesson. The final warning. So what is the core message our ancestors wanted to leave for us? When we gather the texts from around the world, we recognize an unchanging pattern. The cause that triggered the Great Flood was not a random natural event. It happened because the morality of humanity had hit bottom. When human beings lost their kind nature, became arrogant and cruel, and turned their backs on the laws of the universe, destruction became the inevitable result. And have you noticed? Whether it is the water god of the Sumerians, the Lord God Jehovah in the Bible, or the god Ea of Babylon, the divine beings chose to save only a very small group of people. They were the rare ones who still preserved kindness, reverence, and obedience to the divine in the middle of a rotten society. We have found countless remnants of technologies beyond their time, from prehistoric civilizations, from natural nuclear reactors, to architectural works far ahead of their age. But strangely, what they struggled to carve into stone and pass down orally across thousands of years for us was not an engineering blueprint or a technological secret. What they left behind was a myth. Why? Because after paying a price too terrible to describe humanity, realized an absolute truth: material civilization, no matter how advanced, cannot serve as a shield against heavenly disaster. For the peoples who survived, the first condition for living happily was not technology, but revering virtue, preserving human dignity and kindness. And yet, how is the generation of descendants today responding? Under the explosion of modern science and technology, we completely deny the existence of the divine. We treat the tears and warnings of our ancestors as absurd fairy tales meant to put children to sleep. Reading again the records written thousands of years ago, pause for a moment and reflect today as people rush into the race for material things. Humanity is gradually losing even the most basic moral boundaries. We not only fail to remember the lesson of history, but seem unconsciously to be stepping back into the very same path that destroyed the pre-Adamite civilization. And if the cycle of destruction truly exists, if today's corruption is activating the next reset, will the arrogance of modern science be strong enough to save us from the wrath of nature? Or will history once again close beneath the waters? Remember, thousands of years ago, Noah, Deucalion, and Manu survived because they were warned in advance to build a wooden boat. But today, facing the great flood of greed, indifference, and moral decay, the Noah's Ark of the 21st century cannot be built from wood nails or any advanced technology. It can only be built from kindness itself. We are living in the most contradictory age in history. Human beings can launch spacecraft to Mars and create artificial intelligence, yet they are still willing to trample one another for a few coins or a little empty fame on social media. We exhaust ourselves fighting, scheming, and looking for every way to push others down in order to lift ourselves up. We become proud of material achievements and forget that pride and selfishness are the very poison that once turned Lucifer from a radiant angel into the evil one, and the same force that caused countless brilliant civilizations in the past to collapse. If destruction begins when human beings turn their backs on the Creator, then the only salvation is to return to what He has taught. You see, God does not ask us to build Him magnificent temples plated with gold, nor does He demand complicated rituals. His message from the beginning of time until now has never changed love and humility. He teaches us humility to break down the imaginary throne that pride builds inside each person's mind. Recognize that every gift, talent, or possession you have is borrowed from the universe. Do not use it as a weapon to wound your fellow human beings. He teaches us forgiveness because resentment is only a fire from hell that burns the one who carries it before it spreads to anyone else. And above all, He teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Living with kindness is not weakness or loss. In a world racing after self-interest, daring to choose to be a decent person is the greatest courage. Start with the smallest things in real life. Pause for 1 second before releasing cruel words that wound someone else. Reach out a hand to lift up someone who has fallen instead of stepping on them. Hold firmly to honesty, even when facing temptations of money. Yield a little, be more forgiving, and give a little more. Only when you clear away the tumor of envy in your heart, extinguish the fire of greed, and kindle the light of compassion, can the darkness of the evil one truly be pushed back. Do not wait until disaster strikes to hurriedly fold your hands in prayer. Salvation does not lie in tomorrow. It lies in every kind thought and every decent action you choose right now. No matter whether Earth's history has gone through 7 or 70 resets, the law of the universe remains unchanged. Matter will eventually become dust, glory will drift into the past, and the only thing that can pass through every destruction of time, the only thing preserved to plant the seed for a new world, is dignity and human compassion. The battle between light and darkness has never ended. It is not taking place in some distant heaven. It is unfolding every second, every minute inside your own heart. The decision is yours. Piecing together all the fragments from the Bible mythology and geology, we cannot deny this earth has erased civilizations many times before. But water was not the only instrument of judgment. If the Great Flood was a slow, silent death by suffocation swallowing the land across generations, then at another far more ancient point in time, humanity once faced a death sentence that unfolded in an instant. An event that, when it arrived, turned the sky black, made the temperature boil, and reduced every civilization to ash in the blink of an eye. It was the great catastrophe known as the rain of fire from the sky. Ancient Pompeii, when luxury awakened the wrath of the volcano. In the year 79 after Christ, the city of Pompeii in southern Italy was wiped out in an instant beneath a furious volcanic eruption. Pompeii at that time was an ancient Roman city of extreme luxury, a paradise of indulgence and sensual excess. But then all that prosperity was frozen forever in a single night, buried together with its own dark history. The eruption that submerged Pompeii nearly 2,000 years ago has always been regarded as one of the most terrifying disasters of the ancient world. Today, let us turn back to the ruins of Pompeii and see what truly lies beneath that layer of ash, a glorious past or a bloody lesson. The strike of a pickaxe reveals a sleeping city. In the spring of the year 1748, a farmer named Andre was digging soil in his vineyard. Suddenly, the blade of his pickaxe became stuck against something hard and solid. Thinking it was a large stone, he tried to pull the pickaxe out, but he could not. He quickly called his brother and sister-in-law to help. When the mud and soil were scraped away, they were stunned to discover that the pickaxe had not struck a stone at all. It had pierced through a metal cabinet. When the cabinet was dug up and forced open, people found inside a pile of gold and silver jewelry, along with ancient coins that had been melted and deformed. Immediately, this discovery shocked the scholarly world, and a large-scale excavation officially began. But when archaeologists of the 18th and 19th centuries began digging deep into the ground, they were completely unprepared for what was about to appear. They noticed that beneath the massive layer of ash and mud, there were strange empty spaces. One hollow followed another, and some of them were even connected. Confused by this phenomenon, one expert came up with an idea. Pour liquid plaster into those cavities, wait for it to harden, then remove the surrounding soil to see what they actually were. And the result terrified everyone present. Those empty spaces were the molds of bodies that had never been buried. The volcanic ash had fallen so quickly that it sealed the victims' bodies completely. Over time, the flesh decomposed and left empty spaces inside the earth. By pouring plaster into them, archaeologists were able to recreate the exact postures of the victims in the final moments of their lives. The scene was unimaginably tragic. Some people had their hands tightly covering their heads in despair. Some were curled up and shrinking in fear. Some were sitting collapsed in unbearable pain. People even found the remains of slaves who had been chained by their masters, unable to escape when the disaster came, and could only sit helplessly waiting to die in a sea of fire. An ancient letter recounts the end of the world. That fateful day was August 24th in the year 79 after Christ. Mount Vesuvius in southern Italy suddenly awakened. A gigantic flow of ash, gravel, and volcanic mud poured down, submerging 3 nearby towns, including Pompeii and the wealthy port town of Herculaneum. The cruelty of this disaster was not only recorded through archaeological remains, it was also vividly described in a precious ancient letter. The author of the letter was an 18-year-old survivor named Pliny, often called Pliny the Younger. Standing across the Bay of Naples, he witnessed the end of Pompeii with his own eyes and wrote everything down in a letter to the Roman historian Tacitus. In the letter, Pliny the Younger described it this way: "A gigantic cloud shaped like a pine tree suddenly rose on the horizon, followed by a great fire burning violently. The sky suddenly became dark and gloomy, making the red flames appear even more dazzling and unnatural. The earth shook again and again without stopping. We were too terrified to step outside because burning stones were continuously falling from the sky like hail. Because Pompeii was captured and buried in a single moment, it accidentally became a perfect time capsule. The entire central square, shops, temples, theaters, homes, bars, brothels, public baths, and even human bodies were preserved almost intact, allowing us today to see clearly into the real life of Roman people in the 1st century. The prosperity of the ancient city of desire, and what people talk about most when studying Pompeii, is its diseased level of luxury. In terms of infrastructure, Pompeii could be considered one of the most modern and advanced cities in the world at that time. A network of water pipes buried deep beneath the roads spread in every direction. Flush toilets were widely used in the city, with rough ceramic sewer systems carrying waste away. The streets were planned in straight, flat lines, and there was even the concept of sidewalks separating pedestrians from vehicles. The city had a huge amphitheater, 3 large public baths, several open-air theaters, hundreds of wine shops, and countless brothels everywhere. The residents of Pompeii lived in silk and comfort, but pleasure-seeking arrogance and sexual excess also sank deep into every level of society. The people of Pompeii were especially obsessed with food. For the elite, stuffing themselves with delicacies seemed to be the only meaning of existence. Their menus were proof of outrageous extravagance: crane tongues, lark livers, sea urchins imported from Spain. giraffes brought from North Africa, and flamingos caught around the Mediterranean. There was almost no creature they did not dare to eat. Some wealthy people in Pompeii even fed sea eels with the flesh of recently killed slaves, because they believed this would make the eel meat much more delicious. At that time, eating while lying down was a symbol of power. The wealthy would recline on long marble couches, padded with soft cushions, leaning on one elbow as they enjoyed their food. Only children and people of low status had to sit while slaves stood respectfully to serve them. Extravagant banquets often began at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and lasted all through the night, drowning in wine, meat, and lust. To show off their wealth, the rich were willing to roast extremely expensive cuts of meat, take only one bite and throw them straight onto the ground, or chew a few grapes and toss away the whole bunch. That vulgar wastefulness was praised as fashionable class. Even more frightening when their stomachs were already full. But their mouths still craved more. The people of Pompeii invented a sick trend, using feathers, or forcing the throat to vomit out the old food, empty the stomach, and then keep eating. Alongside eating brothels and public baths were the centers of city life. The largest brothel there had 29 rooms, and the doors of each room were covered with explicit erotic images. The enormous number of sexual artifacts excavated there was so obscene that archaeologists themselves were once confused and embarrassed. Thanks to its favorable location, the people of Pompeii channeled natural geothermal heat from Mount Vesuvius to warm the public baths. These were not only places for washing, they were diplomatic centers where powerful people socialized and negotiated business. The baths were equipped with comforts no less impressive than a modern spa: changing rooms, massage rooms, steam rooms, and beauty rooms. But on the walls, people painted them full of suggestive frescoes. There were mixed bathing rooms for men and women, homosexual bathing areas, and even spaces reserved for collective sexual excess. In Pompeii, erotic culture seeped into every corner, from frescoes and marble sculptures to everyday objects such as street lamps, wine cups, and coins. The city's moral decay had truly reached the edge of madness. If lust was still not enough to stimulate them, then bloody violence completed the rest. Pompeii's great amphitheater was built 50 years before the famous Colosseum in Rome, with a capacity of more than 10,000 people. This arena was not born for sports. It was a slaughterhouse, a place where endless life and death battles took place between wild beasts and wild beasts, between slaves and hungry beasts, or between prisoners killing one another. Both the wealthy and the common people were fanatical about this brutal pleasure. The roars of wild beasts, the heart-rending screams of human beings, bleeding wounds and torn arms. The more the victims struggled against death, the more excited the spectators became. In those blood-soaked stands, there was no room for compassion, only the frenzied excitement of violence. On the walls of some shops, people found a scrawled line: "Making money is pleasure." The life philosophy of the people of Pompeii was summed up in earning money in order to enjoy glory and indulgence. A silver cup that was dug up bore the inscription, "Enjoy life fully, because tomorrow is uncertain." Another line read, "Wine and women will destroy my body." But apart from these things, what meaning does life still have? Clearly, no matter how many temples to the gods stood throughout the city, the people of Pompeii truly worshipped only one thing: the sensual pleasure of the present world. The wrath quietly descends. Living inside that glamorous light, the pleasure-loving people of Pompeii could not imagine that death was standing right behind them. In fact, on February 8th, in the year 62 after Christ, a powerful earthquake shook Pompeii. But the residents at that time were too arrogant to recognize it as the final warning heaven had given them. They quickly rebuilt the city and continued sinking into their chaotic way of life. Until August 24th, in the year 79, everything seemed normal. The sky was clear and no one had any sense that a tragedy was coming. Then suddenly Mount Vesuvius which had slept for thousands of years, roared awake. It spewed out a massive amount of blazing lava. In only a moment, black clouds of smoke covered the entire sky, turning day into night. Boiling lava, along with billions of tons of gravel, sand, and volcanic ash, poured down onto the city like an inescapable storm. The most luxurious city of ancient Rome was buried alive, completely beneath the earth. Pompeii was frozen in one moment, and its history was officially brought to an end. Many Christian researchers later believed that the city of Pompeii had committed 7 deadly sins, including violence, sadism, greed, gluttony, arrogance, and frenzied lust. That corruption had reached the limit of the heavenly way, leading God to send down punishment. Some even said that it was the raging fire of desire among the people of Pompeii that awakened Mount Vesuvius after it had slept for thousands of years. Just like the way it was destroyed, Pompeii seems to have been destined to be found again by humanity. After sleeping beneath the ground for more than 1,600 years, the ancient city appeared before modern humanity in a silent yet haunting form. History is always a mirror, and the return of Pompeii from death is surely not merely for people today to buy tourist tickets, take check-in photos, and admire it with amazement. It lies there like a fossilized verdict in the river of time, forcing the modern world to stop and reflect when moral boundaries are broken and limitless greed rises to power. How terrible will the price be? Yet, if you think the tragedy of Pompeii was a one-of-a-kind fury of nature, you are mistaken. Earth has pressed the button for a reset by fire more than once. History is in reality a brutal cycle. Long before Rome was born, and a full 1,700 years before Mount Vesuvius awakened, Earth had already witnessed an erasure event on an even more earth-shaking scale. Akrotiri on the island of Thera, the brutal ending of the continent of Atlantis. Long before Rome was born, and a full 1,700 years before the tragedy of Pompeii, Earth had already witnessed an erasure event on a terrifying scale. It was the end of the city of Akrotiri, located on the volcanic island of Thera, which today is the beautiful Greek tourist island of Santorini. Around the year 1600 before Christ, when much of the world was still living in primitive conditions or inside huts made of mud and thatch, Akrotiri had already risen into a commercial supercity. It was the jewel of the Minoan civilization, the maritime power that dominated the entire Mediterranean Sea at that time. If you could travel back in time to Akrotiri at that moment, you would be stunned as if you had wandered into an early modern city. The archaeological evidence excavated beneath the ash has revealed a level of engineering thousands of years ahead of humanity. The people there did not build simple one-story houses. They built apartment buildings 3 to 4 stories high out of ashlar stone blocks. Their walls were decorated with enormous brightly colored frescoes depicting large ships, African blue monkeys, birds, and even scenes of young boys wearing gloves and practicing boxing. But the most shocking thing was not the architecture. It was the water system. Archaeologists have found highly sophisticated terracotta pipes buried inside the walls of the houses. The frightening part is this: they had separate systems for hot and cold water. The cold water came from springs, while the hot water was drawn directly from the volcanic geothermal veins. More than that, Akrotiri already had flush toilets that drained straight into an underground sewage system beneath the streets. It was a level of luxury and cleanliness that even European cities in the Middle Ages would have desperately desired. And yet all of that perfection was built directly on the mouth of a sleeping monster. Unlike Pompeii, which was struck by surprise, Akrotiri had received warnings. A few weeks before the disaster, powerful earthquakes repeatedly tore through the city. The people recognized the danger. They quickly gathered their gold, silver, and possessions, then boarded enormous fleets of sailing ships to flee. That is why at the Akrotiri archaeological site, no human skeletons or expensive jewelry have been found. They escaped the island, but they could not escape the wrath of nature. Just as the residents had pulled up anchor and were drifting out at sea, the Thera volcano officially exploded. This was not an ordinary eruption. Geologists call it a supercolossal eruption, a volcanic explosivity index of 7. Its destructive power was tens of thousands of times stronger than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion was so terrifying that it blew away and hollowed out the entire core of the island, causing tens of billions of tons of rock and earth to collapse straight into the sea, forming the giant crescent-shaped bay of Santorini that we see today. A gigantic column of ash blasted straight into the stratosphere, reaching 36 kilometers high, blocking sunlight for months and causing a volcanic winter that changed the global climate. Even ancient records from the Xia dynasty in China are said to mention snow falling in summer at that very time. At the same time, the collapse of the island created a massive wall of water, a mega tsunami, tens of meters high, that raced forward at jet-like speeds, sweeping across the Mediterranean. That tsunami crushed the entire fleet of Akrotiri refugees before crashing into the island of Crete, the capital of the Minoan civilization, wiping this naval superpower completely off the map of history in a single day. The once radiant city of Akrotiri was buried forever beneath a layer of ash, gravel, and volcanic debris, up to 60 meters thick, silent and alone. More than 1,200 years after that disaster, the great Greek philosopher Plato heard fragments of an oral memory about a superior naval kingdom, extremely wealthy, yet punished by the gods, and sunk beneath the sea in a single bloody day and night. From the broken memories of Akrotiri, Plato wrote down and left humanity one of the most haunting legendary stories of all time, the fall of the continent of Atlantis. Now you understand, Atlantis is not science fiction. It is a real and terrifying memory of humanity wrapped inside a mythological shell. The corruption of Sodom and Gomorrah and their swift fall. Leaving the ruins of Europe behind, let us turn the compass and move deep into the fertile plain of the Jordan River. The place where one of the most prosperous yet most infamous cities in human history once stood, Sodom and Gomorrah. If Pompeii was the embodiment of Roman depravity, then Sodom was the ancestor of every primal sin. Its corruption was so terrible that in Western dictionaries, even to this day, derivative words such as sodomy or sodomite are still used broadly to describe deviant and extreme acts of sexual immorality. But before it became a city of sin, Sodom had once been an extremely radiant civilization. Located on a fertile land, the people of Sodom quickly built a massive economic empire. And yet their history was also stained with blood. At that time, the kingdom of Elam expanded its power and dominated the entire Jordan plain, including 5 great cities, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, for 12 long years. In the 13th year, these 5 cities decided to rebel. An epic war broke out. The alliance of 5 kings, led by the king of Sodom, faced the alliance of 4 kings, led by the king of Elam. Historians call this the War of the 9 Kings on the Jordan Plain. In the end, the Sodom alliance suffered a crushing defeat. The city was trampled and the people were taken as slaves. But at the most desperate moment, a great figure appeared. Abraham, the beloved patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. He gathered an elite force, defeated the Elamite alliance, and successfully rescued the people of Sodom from slavery. After such a life and death event, one might think the people of Sodom would learn reverence for heaven and earth and cultivate their hearts. But no. When they returned to their wealthy and comfortable life, they sank even deeper into the mud of lust, luxury, and diseased pleasures. Sexual immorality, violence, and rape took place openly in broad daylight. Abraham's bargain and the terrifying night in Sodom. the rod of Sodom had risen all the way to heaven. The Bible records that one day, 3 strange visitors, who were in truth 3 angels, came to visit Abraham. They carried a severe judgment from God. Sodom and Gomorrah would be wiped out because their sins had become utterly detestable. As a man full of compassion, Abraham stepped forward to bargain with God, asking for a path of survival for the living beings in the city. He pleaded, "Please spare Sodom if 50 righteous people can be found there." God agreed. But Abraham knew very well how corrupt the city had become, so he continued lowering the number down to 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. If there were 10 righteous people in Sodom, the city would not be destroyed. God accepted. But tragically, in a vast supercity like Sodom, not even 10 people could be found who still preserved their humanity. That very evening, 2 angels in human form entered the gate of Sodom. At that time, Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the city gate. Recognizing the travelers from afar, Lot warmly invited them into his home, treated them with care, and baked unleavened bread for them to eat. But as soon as darkness fell, a horrifying scene unfolded. Hundreds of residents of Sodom, from old men to young men, came and surrounded the house. They growled, pounded on the door, and demanded that Lot hand over the 2 strange visitors so they could commit a collective act of sexual violence. In a desperate attempt to protect his guests, Lot made a shocking decision. He volunteered to hand over his 2 virgin daughters to the raging crowd as long as they spared the visitors' daughters. In the condition of Sodom at that time, perhaps those 2 young women were among the few who had not yet been defiled, but the crowd rejected him outright. They cursed Lot as a strange outsider, someone who lived in Sodom but refused to become corrupt like the people of Sodom. They threatened to humiliate Lot himself even more terribly. Depravity had completely overwhelmed humanity. Even though Lot was the nephew of the benefactor who had once saved the lives of the entire city. At the very moment the crowd was about to break through the door, the 2 angels reached out and pulled Lot inside. By their power, they struck the entire crowd outside with a blinding light, causing them to grope around in madness, unable to find the door of the house. Inside the house, the angels revealed their true identity and commanded, "God has decided to destroy this place. Take your wife, your daughters, and your people, and flee immediately." Lot hurried away to warn the 2 young men who were about to marry his daughters. But all he received in return was mocking laughter. They thought he had gone mad. At dawn, urged on by the angels, Lot fled with his wife and 2 daughters. The angels left behind a forbidden command. Leave everything behind, run to the high mountains, and absolutely do not look back. As soon as they escaped the city, the sky suddenly split open. Fire and brimstone sulfur burned fiercely and poured down from heaven like absolute wrath. The entire city erupted in flames. But while they were fleeing, Lot's wife, because she was too attached to the enormous wealth and luxurious life she had left behind, turned her head and looked back. Immediately, her entire body was covered by a rain of salt and hardened into a pillar of salt, standing forever in the desert. The next morning, Abraham stood far away and looked toward the plain. The place that had once been the most radiant city in the region was now only a flat, blackened wasteland with thick columns of smoke rising violently like a gigantic furnace. Chilling scientific evidence. What is the truth? The story above sounds like a fantasy film until modern science enters the picture. When archaeologists excavated the area of Tal el-Hammam, a site identified as the ruins of Sodom, they discovered a shocking truth. This site had once been a civilization that existed for 2,500 years, protected by massive city walls reaching 30 meters high and 15 meters thick. And yet, around 3,700 years ago, this entire impregnable city was vaporized in an instant. Sediment analyses show that a gigantic meteor exploded in the sky above Tal el-Hammam, covering an area of 500 square kilometers. The heat created by the airburst was so terrifying that pieces of pottery were melted into a thin layer of glass only 1 millimeter thick. To produce this phenomenon, temperatures had to reach between 8,000 degrees Celsius and 12,000 degrees Celsius within only a few thousandths of a second hotter than the surface of the sun. Even more frightening, the ruins were covered by a dense layer of salt and sulfate. Science explains that the heat from the meteor explosion vaporized a massive amount of water from the nearby Dead Sea. A toxic rain of salt then poured down, covering all of Tal el Hammam and turning it into a dead land where not a single blade of grass could grow for 700 years afterward. Look at this. Science has unintentionally confirmed every detail in the Bible with chilling perfection. The rain of fire from the sky, the exploding meteor burning sulfur, and a deadly rain of salt, which explains the phenomenon of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. We can see this clearly. The story of Sodom is not only history, it is a mirror reflecting directly into the soul of modern society. Today, many people defend themselves by saying, "I do not steal, I do not kill. I earn money through my own sweat and effort, so I have the right to enjoy life however I like. I live in a civilized way. I am materialistic. I have my own moral standards." But you are wrong. The standard of right or wrong, good or evil, has never been and will never be decided by human beings themselves. In both Eastern and Western faith traditions, the Creator has established extremely basic foundations of being human. The cell of society is the family. Every physical relationship outside the sacred bond of marriage is regarded as deviant desire. When human beings break those core foundations, then in the eyes of the divine, they have stripped themselves of the qualification of being human, even if human law is encouraging it. Look at society today. Material life has reached an unprecedented peak, yet human beings are falling deeper into emptiness. They sink into pleasure, chase new forms of sensual entertainment, and become trapped so deeply that they cannot escape. Disgusting crimes and moral collapse appear everywhere in the news, to the point that society treats them as normal. Even those who try to live decently and preserve purity are mocked by the crowd as outdated or different, exactly like the way the people of Sodom cursed Lot. But East Asian people have a saying: "People are acting, and heaven is watching." No disaster arrives without reason. The destruction of Sodom is the solemn roar of the law of the universe, when corrupt things are praised as fashionable trends, when injustice spreads everywhere and righteous people become rare. That is when the bell of Judgment Day begins to ring. Jesus once left his disciples with a chilling prophecy. On the day of judgment, there will be kingdoms that suffer a fate worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. No matter the civilization, the hour of the great judgment always preserves only those who still protect the standard of being human. As for those who endlessly chase material desire attached to the mud of sin like Lot's wife, when the fire from heaven falls, all their enormous wealth will end as nothing more than a handful of white salt. Saint-Pierre, the Pompeii of the 20th century, and the price of arrogance. We do not need to turn the time machine back to the distant, ancient world. Because even in the modern age, when human beings proudly beat their chests over scientific and technological civilization, our arrogance still continues to pay terrifying prices. That was the horrific tragedy that took place on May 8th in the year 1902 in the city of Saint-Pierre, located on the beautiful island of Martinique in the Caribbean Sea. In the early years of the 20th century, Saint-Pierre was not an unknown town. It was celebrated around the world as the Paris of the Caribbean. It was extremely prosperous, wealthy, and one of the busiest commercial and cultural centers in the region. Along its streets stood magnificent theaters, luxurious mansions of the upper class, and countless expensive rum distilleries. And yet, that prosperity was placed in a fatal location right at the foot of the volcano Mount Pelée. In early May of the year 1900, 1952, Mount Pelée began to awaken. Smoke and ash rose up and blackened the sky. Small earthquakes repeatedly battered the city, and the thick smell of sulfur filled the air. That was nature's clearest warning run before it is too late. And yet human greed and power blinded them to life itself. At that time, the authorities and politicians in Saint-Pierre were urgently preparing for an important election that was about to take place. Despite the panic of the people because they wanted to preserve the number of voters and make sure the ballot boxes would not be empty, they made one of the most cruel decisions in history. They banned evacuation. They continuously released reassuring statements in the newspapers, boldly declaring, "The volcano is very safe. There is nothing to fear. The rumors are only hysteria." Even more horrifying, the city governor deployed troops to block the main roads, refusing to allow any residents to leave the city and seek refuge. They gambled the lives of 30,000 people in exchange for political votes. And the price for that extreme arrogance was fixed at exactly 7:52 in the morning on May 8th in the year 1902. Mount Pelée exploded. It did not release slow-moving red lava streams like in the movies. It unleashed one of nature's most destructive weapons, a pyroclastic flow. It was a gigantic cloud packed with toxic gas ash and burning hot rocks. With its core temperature soaring to more than 1,000 degrees Celsius, this death cloud tore down the mountainside and rushed straight toward the city below at a terrifying speed, nearly 500 kilometers per hour. No one had a chance to run. No one even had time to utter a final word. In only 3 short minutes, the entire Paris of the Caribbean was completely wiped off the map of the world. The heat wave of 1,000 degrees Celsius passed through and instantly burned 30,000 lives. The heat was so intense that the water inside human bodies evaporated. Immediately, blood vessels burst, and many people were carbonized while still sitting inside their homes drinking coffee. 30,000 people vanished in 180 seconds. But history always leaves behind its sharpest ironies. Among the 30,000 people present in Saint-Pierre that morning, archaeologists and rescue teams found only 2 survivors. And the most famous of them was Ludger Silbaris. He was not a powerful politician. He was not a wealthy magnate. Ludger Silbaris was a condemned prisoner locked deep underground. His cell was dark and suffocating with only a tiny ventilation slit, and it had been built with extremely thick stone walls to prevent prisoners from escaping. The punishment of man turned into the perfect bunker that protected him from the punishment of nature. That morning, while dignified politicians and wealthy, powerful people were burned into ash inside their luxurious mansions, the man at the very bottom of society, a prisoner stripped of his freedom, became the only one to open his eyes and return from death to tell the story of this tragedy. So then, from the radiant Akrotiri of the Atlantis legend to the fiery Sodom of the Bible to the luxurious Pompeii of ancient Rome, and then to Saint-Pierre of the 20th century, you can see it. Fire and water have always taken turns carrying out their task of cleansing. Nature has never needed a jury's verdict, nor has it needed arguments of defense in order to carry out punishment. The history of Earth is not an endless straight line. It is a cycle. Whenever a civilization reaches the peak of material prosperity, yet slides down into the depths of moral corruption, arrogance, and cruelty, Earth always has a way to press the reset button. The remaining question for all of us, those living in the modern age, is not whether the next disaster will come in the form of water or fire, but whether we are activating that reset button once again with our own hands. Take a moment to think again about the reality of life today. We proudly say that we are living in the most civilized age. The internet covers almost everywhere. Phones are becoming smarter and smarter, and artificial intelligence can do nearly everything in place of human beings. But what is the truth? Machines are becoming more intelligent, while human beings seem to be growing colder toward one another. Indifference is creeping into every corner of life. You can easily see a person suffering an accident, collapsed and bleeding on the street, while the first reaction of the crowd around them is not to rush in and help. They stop, take out their phones, calmly record videos, take pictures, and live stream to gain views and attention on social media. The life of a fellow human being suddenly becomes a tool for entertainment. Geographical distance may have been shortened, but the distance between human hearts is farther than ever. Even inside the family itself, shared meals are becoming increasingly absent. And if people do sit beside one another, each person has their eyes glued to a screen, and no one bothers to ask how the other person lived that day or whether they are tired. We are willing to type sweet words of love to a stranger online. Yet we become irritated and spare even a smile toward our own parents, spouse, and children. And the most painful thing is the way society today looks at morality. Never before has money controlled human character in such a frightening way. People are willing to deceive, trample on the sweat and tears of others, and even harm their own blood relatives just to fight over a few meters of land or a small inheritance. Those who live gently, honestly, and accept a little disadvantage are mocked by society as naive and foolish. On the contrary, those who use every scheme and step on others to make a lot of money are praised as idols, as models of success. Affairs, betrayal, and loose living things that society once condemned are now being normalized by many people and called personal freedom. We switch concepts far too easily. The people of the past were destroyed because they treated sin as something normal. We today are becoming the same. If a society only knows how to chase material things, each person living only for themselves, seeing evil but not daring to speak, seeing people in distress but turning away and ignoring them, then truly we do not need a great flood, nor do we need any rain of fire falling from the sky to end everything. Indifference, greed, and selfishness will automatically gnaw away at this civilization and destroy it from within. It is time for us to slow down. Do not wait for a miracle or for salvation from some supernatural power. Salvation lies in each person's own hands. Begin by putting down your phone and embracing the people you love. Learn to say thank you. Learn to reach out your hand to help a stranger in difficulty. Choose to be a decent person, even if that decency may cause you to suffer a little disadvantage in a society full of calculations. Because in the end, when all glory and wealth have passed away, the only thing that preserves the value of a human being is human kindness. We have now reached the final stage of our journey, decoding the pre-Adamite world and the earth-shaking mysteries sealed within the Ethiopian Bible. From the fallen angels in the Book of Enoch to the giant civilizations once swept away, to the great floods and rains of fire that came down from the sky. Perhaps after hearing these stories, many people will feel curious, overwhelmed, or even afraid before the devastating power of the universe. But you know the greatest and most frightening secret that these banned ancient books wanted to keep hidden is not actually how old the earth is or how many civilizations have been destroyed. The real secret, and also the bloodiest lesson, is this: every destruction begins at the moment human beings lose morality. What did the fallen angels of ancient times bring to early humanity? They brought knowledge, weapons, technology, magic, and luxury. But that brilliant knowledge, when separated from love, turned the pre-Adamite world into a bloody arena of greed, violence, and wild desire. Humanity at that time may have been very intelligent and very powerful, but they forgot how to be human. And when we look back at our world today, is humanity unknowingly walking back into that same tragic path? We are holding the smartest phones in our hands, creating the most sophisticated machines, building towers that reach into the clouds. But alongside all of that, we are also gradually forgetting one another. Deception, indifference, and trampling on others to make money happen every day. We are willing to release cruel words to wound strangers online, pass coldly by someone in hardship, and sometimes act harshly toward the very people we love most in our own families. But God did not create us to live soulless lives like machines. No matter who you are, whether you follow a religion or not, the message the Creator has sent through every age has never changed. God does not ask us to become great figures who change the world, nor does He demand lavish offerings or piles of money. What God teaches is actually very simple. Live with kindness, humility, and love your neighbor as yourself. Becoming a good person does not mean doing something grand and dramatic. Being a good person is simply being honest in your work, not deceiving customers, not cheating in what you measure or sell. It is when you see someone fall from a motorbike on the road and you are willing to stop and help them up instead of standing there watching. It is knowing how to hold back a hurtful sentence when you are angry. It is remaining faithful to the spouse who has gone through storms with you. It is showing tolerance and patience while caring for your parents when they grow old and weak. In a society where many people treat cunning and deception as wisdom, choosing to live uprightly and kindly, and sometimes accepting a little disadvantage, is not foolishness. It is the greatest courage, because money power and even the most advanced technology can all be washed away after a flood or vanish after a rain of fire. The only thing that cannot be burned away, the only thing that follows you to the very end of life and death, is your dignity and the kind deeds you have left in this world. Do not wait until the world stands at the edge of another reset before hurriedly folding your hands in prayer. Salvation does not lie in giant rescue boats. It lies in every kind thought and every warm action you choose today. Keep living fully. Keep living with compassion. Keep a kind heart within you, because in the end, a heart filled with human kindness is the strongest passport that helps us pass through every disaster of time. Thank you for staying with us until the final seconds of today's video. The journey of decoding the Ethiopian Bible and the pre-Adamite world comes to a close here. I hope this story has not only brought you new perspectives on history, but also left a peaceful pause within your soul. If you feel these messages are meaningful, please click like, share this video with the people around you, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking together through the next decoding journeys. Perhaps one small share from you today will bring positive energy and warm the heart of someone who needs it. Goodbye. May you have a truly peaceful day, and we will meet again.